Next, I'll ask our faculty to describe some additional techniques you might use to modify core beliefs, automatic thoughts, or intermediate beliefs. These include self-disclosure, modifying spontaneous images, behavioral experiments, and skill building. What other techniques do you use with all levels of cognition, including core beliefs? And how about if we start with self-disclosure?
Yeah, I use that judiciously. Most recently, was working with a client with avoidant personality who had some difficulty with interacting, speaking with people, especially given her tendency to, I would say, catastrophically misinterpret what was going on in her stomach. I told her I could relate.
What was the catastrophe she feared?
Oh, that she wouldn't be able to perform, that she wouldn't be able to talk, that she wouldn't be able to. I said, oh, I've been there. Been there. I told her that when I was first teaching introductory psychology, I would get the runs before every lecture. I would review my notes on the can. My stomach would be doing flips, and that was just the start of it. And I told her one time that I was in such, and then also I'd tell her that I'd have to be at the podium and grab it for dear life and look at my notes, because God forbid if I should forget anything. But I told her
hard to imagine that you were ever like that.
Oh, yes. Well, what happened is I was running late, I told her, and I didn't have time to go to the bathroom. Got up there to the podium, my stomach was doing double flips. I knew, something was bound to happen. I opened up my bag and I had forgotten my notes. Oh. Had a whole hour and a half to wing it. And so the result is I was not glued to the podium. I had nothing to review or read. I interacted more with the students. I padded it out more, and people liked it better than when I was prepared. People liked it better. So I had a catastrophic idea of what would happen, and it tested it out, and it turned out to be much, much more positive than I ever could have imagined at that point. And after that, I was less reliant on notes. I think what she gleaned from that was, one, not to regard the gastrointestinal symptoms as being so catastrophic, realizing that there's a difference between the water and the pump. In this case, just because the water might be gurgling doesn't mean the pump isn't working, metaphorically speaking. And also that sometimes when you face your fears, you can be surprised, and that the worst may not happen. And I believe that she was able to put that to the test and find out that the worst did not happen for her, that she operated much more effectively with those symptoms than she ever could imagine.
So your self-disclosure really helped her be braver.
Yes. Yes, that is to face that fear.
Yeah.
So I too use self-disclosure judiciously, and my friends know that I have a terrible sense of direction, and I rely on the GPS, and my sense of direction is so poor that I'll even question the GPS, and I'll say to myself, this can't be right. I mean, that's how underdeveloped it is. But I find that when working with clients on modifying core beliefs, this is particularly useful to share, because what I like to point out is that while I have what I like to say is an underdeveloped ability to navigate, it's not global. And I find that with clients with personality...
I'm sorry, what's not global?
My belief that I'm defective. Ah. So whereas I'm underdeveloped, defective, or as I prefer to say, underdeveloped in a particular area, it is not global. And so it's very helpful when modifying core beliefs for clients to understand that there are certainly areas that they're working on or need a lot of work. There are probably a lot of areas that they're good enough, and there might even be some areas that they shine in. And so I use myself as an example of that. I have a couple of areas that I shine. I'm good enough in many, and my sense of direction is so poor. I'm working on it, but it doesn't color the entire picture of myself.
Mm-hmm. Another technique is responding to spontaneous images that are patients with, or clients with personality disorders have. I remember I was working with a client who had dependent personality disorder. She was waiting for a repairman to come in and fix her washing machine. When he came in, he was rather large. She had a spontaneous image, though, of his being larger than life and her being a small child. And what this meant to her was that she was helpless, that she was incompetent. Her automatic thoughts were, what if he tries to take advantage of me? What if he doesn't fix it? What if he fixes it a little bit, but it's really not fixed and I have to call him back? What if he gets really angry with me? And so she had this image of herself as a small child in relationship to how large he was. So one of the things I asked her was, how would you rather imagine yourself in this situation? And she said, well, rather imagine that I am my usual height. And then we did a little bit of role playing of the kinds of things that she could say to him if she thought there was a problem that he wasn't correctly addressing. Then we went back into the image and had her imagine saying these things to him.
Another strategy you can use for all levels of thoughts and beliefs is to use behavioral experiments. So it sounds like Norman had an unexpected behavioral experiment where he tested out his belief that he wouldn't be able to make it through the lecture without his notes. You can also do planned behavioral experiments. So I can think of a narcissistic personality disorder client of mine who he had the core belief that he was weak, and what he did to try to compensate for this was to brag to people, to boast about his job title, what kind of possessions he had. So I asked him, what do you think would happen if you didn't go into these social situations, meeting people, trying to say how powerful you are, how much money you make, what kind of things you have? He said, well, I think they would just see my weakness and they wouldn't want to talk with me. So we had a good experiment coming up in that it was a social event for his wife's work. And the experiment was to not brag, to not boast. So we said if someone asked him what his job was, he would just say the general industry instead of saying his specific job title. And that if they asked him about his hobbies, he couldn't talk about my beach house in this area and my sailboat and all the different cars he had. He would just say generally that he likes being outdoors, like going for hikes, taking walks. And I tried to prepare him too for if the experiment went poorly and people did try to back away. And I said, okay, let's say that you don't brag, you don't tell people how important you are, and they just leave a conversation early, say they have to go. What can you do to help yourself cope with that? He said, well, I'm kind of used to it, and also I can just remind myself that just like I'm not forced to talk with other people aren't forced to talk with me. So he wrote that down on a coping card to make sure that he had that memorized before he went in this situation. So the next session, he came back and said, okay, how'd it go? He goes, well, people actually talk with me longer than they normally did. I got a lot more smiles. It seemed like they were more connected and interacted with me, where a lot of times people just kind of step back and listen to me and then walk away eventually. It seemed like they really wanted to talk with me, and actually got a few comments that people said, hey, I really enjoyed the conversation. So from there I said, so what do you make of this idea that people are going to find out you're weak if you don't brag and tell them all these important things about you? You said, well, I think I don't have to, and things actually go better when I try to drop the strategy of brag and boasting, and didn't seem like anyone really thought of me as being weak.
It just shows the importance of helping clients set up experiences to test their core beliefs. And you did two other important things. One is you prepared the client in case the behavioral experiment didn't go well. And the other thing was that when the experiment was over and he came back and reported on it, you asked him what it meant to him, so that he'd have the chance to say aloud that his core belief had changed.
Exactly.
So in that behavioral experiment, you had the opportunity to work on some skills. And And when I'm with a client who's struggling, the very first thing, or one of the first things I ask myself is this a thinking error or is this a skill deficit?
Or both.
Or both, that's right. And very often with clients with personality disorders, it is absolutely both. But it makes sense at times to focus on skill building, particularly with folks with avoidant traits, because if they're not approaching their feared experiences, they're not going to be able to modify those core beliefs. So in working with a young woman who shared an apartment with a roommate, she was so avoidant and had such poor social skills that she would literally stay in her room all night and didn't want to come out to the shared space because she didn't even have what I like to call opening lines. And her avoidant behavior maintained the core belief that she just was defective and incompetent. And so we started by working on effective communication, and we started with very basics, how to greet people. Sometimes just walking through a shared space and saying, hey, was enough to get her started. And then we progressed to how to initiate conversations, how to maintain conversations. We even progressed to how much she should reveal about herself and to whom. And it helped her a great deal, and ultimately helped her begin to modify that deeply held belief that she was defective in this way.
And I just have one thing to add, which is that I think everyone with a personality disorder is deficient in some skills, some set of skills, and overdeveloped in other skills.
Yeah, yes.
And so that's why with our personality disorder clients, we tend to have to do more teaching of adaptive coping strategies, adaptive behaviors, than we would with someone with just an acute disorder.
So they're going to replace their old behaviors with the more adaptive behaviors.
Exactly. Think about one of your personality disorder clients. What did you learn from the roundtable? Which techniques do you think would be helpful? And here's your practice exercise. Do a role play or write a transcript in which you use one or more of the techniques you just heard about.